All right, Father, thank you again tonight for the privilege of being here. Thank you, Lord, for the singing. Thank you for the songs. Thank you for those whose hearts was moved years and years ago to pen those words. I pray now that the Spirit of God may speak to us from the Word of God. And Lord, I pray tonight that you may sharpen us spiritually. You may encourage us from the Word of God as we look tonight at your dealings with your people. I pray that the Word of God may be an illumination to our path this evening. I pray that the Spirit of God may be able to convict us wherein we need to be convicted. And then, Lord, at the close of this service, help us to respond to whatever the Spirit of God would lead us to do. Well, thank you for it, because we ask this in Jesus' name and for His sake. Amen. There are two books in the Old Testament that really exemplify what we call the providence of God. First of all, we've been studying now for about 7 weeks the book of Esther. But there's another book in the Old Testament that really sets forth the providence of God, and it's another book named after a lady, and that's the book of Ruth. If you study the book of Ruth, it's very interesting that after Ruth made the decision to go with Naomi back to Bethlehem, the Bible said that after they got back, that it was her hap to light upon the field of Boaz. She made a decision way back there, standing between Moab and Bethlehem. And when she decided to go with the Lord decided at that point, providentially, to make sure that her needs were met. Tonight, we come back to the providence of God in the book of Esther. It's impossible, literally impossible, for us to understand, being human, all of the workings of God. First of all, in the confines of our own lives. It's impossible for us to figure out God. We find ourselves looking at our lives in 3 dimensions. We live right now in the present. We talk about our past, and like the song tonight has reminded us of our future. So in the lives of all of us tonight in this building, there is the past, there is the present, and there is the future. If we want to know something about the hour or the minute or the second, we pull our watches out or hold our arm up, and we look to our watches to help us determine the time of day or the hour of day or the minutes in which we're living. If we want to know something about the day or the month or the year or the century, then we have to look at the calendar. Time for us is easily marked. Time for us is carefully measured. Time for us is very objective. We talk about ages of our predecessors. We talk about our parents lived to be a certain age. They lived so many years. We hear the history of our grandparents, and we say they lived so many years. We mark time in years. We mark moments in seconds and in hours. But God is not like that at all. As a matter of fact, He lives and moves outside of the realms of earthly time. He lives and moves beyond the turning of a calendar and the ticking of a clock. Beyond this realm, God has no night. Beyond what we call days and weeks and months and years, God knows nothing about days and nights and months and years and the past and the present and the future. God lives in what theologians call His transcendence, which simply means that God transcends time. God transcends hours and seconds and minutes and weeks and months and years. God sees things in His providentiality vastly different than we see things. We see things in our lives like a somewhat like a movie, of frame after frame after frame. When God looks at our lives, He sees the movie of our life all at once put together. And not only our lives, but He sees the lives of billions and billions of other people who have lived in the past and in the present and in the future. And what we mark out as past and present and future is all eternity to God. I think the illustration that I heard years ago pretty much illustrates what I'm trying to get us to understand. Someone has said that a person that stands behind a fence and sees a parade going by on the other side of the fence as they look through a knothole is representative of the human race. All we can see is what is right in front of us as we look through the little hole in the fence. We cannot see what has gone by, and we cannot see what is coming up from behind. But God, somebody says, is on top of the fence, and He sees both what has gone by. He sees what's coming, but He also sees what is now in the present. Only a person looking at life and eternity from that point of view can make accurate decisions based upon our lives and our future. I believe it was Curtis Hudson years ago who said that as a boy, he used to crawl around on the floor when his parents had quiltings, and they called all of the ladies of the community in, and a lot of strings hanging down underneath of that quilting frame. And he said while they were quilting, putting the quilt together, he used to pull on his mother's dress and try to get her to pick him up and put him in her lap so he could see the other side. And she would say to him, "Son, just wait. We're busy right now. Just wait until we finish the product, and we will allow you to see it from the other side." After a few days of quilting, he said that his mother reached down and picked him up and put him in her arms, and for the first time, he could see the quilt from the top side, and he was able to see the finished, beautiful product. We only see what's on the bottom side. We cannot see what's on the top side. We do not see the plan of God in its fullness. We do not understand the plan of God in its fullness. We cannot comprehend the plan of God in its fullness. We have to trust God daily. But God does not live in time. God lives in the eternal present. Time means nothing to God. Time is of no essence to God. He was the beginning of time. He will be the ending of time. And in between time, God still lives in the eternal present. Being God, He sees everything. The Bible says in the book of Revelation that He's the Alpha and the Omega. That means that He is the beginning and He is the ending. And He's all that's in between, and He knows all that's in between. He sees all that's in between. He understands all that's in between. And God has all that's in between already figured out. And God already knows everything that's in between. We don't know that. We don't understand that. And many times in the providence of God, we say to ourselves, this makes absolutely no sense. Why is God allowing this to happen? Why does God allow this to be this way? Why does God bring this calamity upon me? I've heard that question throughout my lifetime and throughout my ministry. People will say, why did God allow this to happen? Why did God take this person from me? And my question, or my answer to that is always this: we have to trust an omnipotent God to never lead us where His grace will not sustain us. I have learned through the years that we are wise to trust the providence of God. God doesn't have to tell us why He does the things He does. Sometimes we'd like for Him to, but the truth of the matter is, if He chose to do that, we wouldn't understand it because we're human, and we cannot understand that portion of God's wisdom. We cannot understand that portion of God's thinking. We cannot understand that portion of God's power, and we cannot understand that portion of God's providence. But we have to recognize tonight that the person that sees the complete picture can make better decisions than we can. Therefore, we must trust Him and not doubt Him and not deny Him, but follow Him. And although we do not understand the whys and the wherefores, we must continually by faith believe that He is a God that knows what He's doing and that He's going to lead us along the journey of life to the best of His ability to get us where He's trying to take us. Now, the providence of God is found here in the book of Esther. It is an unusual book because the word God is not one time named in the confines of these chapters. So far as I know, it's not quoted in the New Testament. Many of the Old Testament books are quoted in New Testament scriptures, but not the book of Esther. Prayer per se is not named in the book of Esther. However, the fingerprints of a transcendent God is all over this book and is found on every page of the book of Esther. Now the sequence, as we have looked in the book of Esther, goes something like this. Vashti was asked to come to a party. She refused to do so because it was sinful. The story goes on, and Esther eventually comes on the scene, a Jew. And Mordecai told her not to tell the king that she was a Jew. He did not know that. Eventually, the Bible says that Mordecai understands that there is insurrection in the kingdom. And he hears about an assassination attempt against the king. He informs the people, the right people. They do the investigation. And they hang the two men that are endeavoring to take the life of the king. You would think at that point in time that the dear man of God, Mordecai, would be exalted up in the kingdom. But it was Haman that got exalted. One night, and this is very unusual in our last study, one night the king could not sleep. God was in charge of his sleepless night. And in order for him to find out about the minutes of his kingdom and so forth, he got out of bed and he had them to read to him the minutes of his kingdom, what had happened in the past. And you remember the story last week. All of a sudden, it's brought to his remembrance that Mordecai had literally saved his life. And he inquired about that, and he said, have we done anything to promote him, to award him? And they read on, and they said, no, nothing has taken place. He has not been promoted in the kingdom. Now, Haman had been promoted, and as Haman would come in and go out, the people would bow down before him, and they would acknowledge that he held a cabinet position in the king's kingdom. But he was mad because Mordecai, being a Jew, would not bow before anyone. And so he sought to take the life of Mordecai. He went to the king, and he said to the king, there's a group of people here that needs to be exterminated. He paid the king money, and the king gave him his signet ring and said, okay, then sign a decree that these people shall be killed. The king had no idea if they were Jews or not. He didn't care. Life didn't really mean anything to him. So Haman took the signet ring, he made the decree, he put the king's signature on there, and he sent it out to all of the providences that on a particular day, all of the Jews will be killed. Haman, of course, understood what was about to happen. He got the word to Queen Esther, and Esther finally got into the presence of the king and said, I need to meet with you, and here's what I want to do. We want to establish a beautiful banquet, and I want you and Haman to come to the banquet. They came together, and the king said to Esther, what can I do for you, even to the half of my kingdom? And she said, King, let's have another banquet at another time, like tomorrow night. And tomorrow night I will reveal to you what's on my heart. They consented to do so. And now we're coming down to that particular sequence here in the 7th chapter of the book of Esther. And I want you to notice some things with me tonight, if you will. The Bible says in chapter 7, verse number 1, so the king and Haman came to banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition? Now remember, they've already had one banquet. Now they're coming to the second one. What is it? The king said. What is it that I can do for you? Now I want you to remember there's some things here that really doesn't make sense from our perspective. And it gets in again to the providence of God. Had we been standing there that day when the king elevated Haman, we would have said from our perspective, hey, wait a minute, Mr. King. You don't want to put this man at the... He's a crook. We would have said, what in the world do you mean? This guy wants to exterminate thousands of people in the kingdom. But there was no voice from heaven. The providence of God is watching over this situation. You don't have to fear. God's still in charge. And when they put Haman in that exalted position, it doesn't take God by surprise. God knows exactly what's happening. He knows precisely what's going on. And God is still in charge of the situation. You know what I'm encouraged with tonight? You know what causes me, when I can, under normal circumstances, be having a bad day? You know what causes me to have a good day? Because I stop and consider who's in charge. I look at the election and I get upset. I mean, what do you have to choose from? You have two people on one side that believe life is of no value, believe in abortion. And then you have a person on the other side that has all kinds of problems. At least he does believe that abortion is murder. But there's no clear-cut decision. And it may be God's going to give us what we deserve. I don't know. It's not my call. But one thing I do know, no matter how black the arising may appear to be, just as in the book of Esther, in the providence of God, God is in charge. Whatever He has to do to get His will done. If He has to bring us to our knees, He can do that. God's in charge. If He chooses to exalt certain people, He has the power to do that. It is beyond our control. Now, we do what we do as citizens. Somebody said the other day, why don't God bless America? And somebody responded to that, He'd like to if you could pass some laws He could bless. Good statement. Good statement. Now, notice, if we'd been standing here that day, we would have said, you're making some tremendous mistakes here. Why don't you exalt Mordecai? Why in the world are you exalting Haman? And heaven is silent. I have never heard a man in my life, I've never done it. I have never heard a pastor in my life. Look, from Joseph to Moses in the Old Testament Scripture, there's a 400-year period of silence. It seems as if God's not doing anything for 400 years. And yet God was getting ready to deliver a nation. What's 400 years to God? He lives in eternity. If you come to the last book of the Old Testament, the book of Malachi, there's 400 years of silence between Malachi and Matthew. And it seems as if God's on vacation. There's no prophet heard from. There are no scriptures that are given. For 400 years, silence. I've never heard anybody preach on the 400 years of silence between Joseph and Moses. I've never heard anybody preach on the 400 years of silence between Malachi and Matthew. There's a book in the Old Testament. It's called the book, as a matter of fact, I want you to turn there just a minute. It's called the book of Habakkuk. Look at the book of Habakkuk. It's page number 955. Here again is the providence of God. The providence of God. Notice, if you will, Habakkuk chapter number 1, 955. Habakkuk is saying in this chapter, it seems as if God is indifferent. Notice verse 1, Habakkuk chapter 1. The burden which Habakkuk the prophet did see. O Lord, how long shall I cry? He's crying for help. Why? The nation's in peril. It doesn't seem like God's intervening. It seems like God's indifferent. It seems like God has got His ears stopped up and He's not listening to the cries of the prophet. And he cries out, O Lord, how long shall I cry? And thou wilt not hear. Ever cry out unto thee of the violence, and thou wilt not save. It seemed as if God was inactive. It seemed as if God was indifferent. It seemed as if God was inconsistent, because down in verse number 4 he said, the law is slackened and judgment doth never go forth. For the wicked doth compass about the righteous. Therefore wrong judgment proceedeth. Man, that's the description of us today. And he said, Lord, verse 2, how long? Lord, when are you going to intervene? In His own timing. In God's own providence. Because God's in charge. God knows what He's doing. God's not calling an emergency session in heaven tonight out of inactivity because He doesn't know what's going on. God knows what's happening. Down in verse 6, for lo, I raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter, watch this, that bitter and hasty nation which shall march through the breadth of the land to possess the dwelling places that are not theirs. God said, I'm coming through. I'm going to take a nation that's more sinful than you are, and I'm going to judge you. It seemed like God was inactive. I don't have time to get in it. But if you read the book of Habakkuk, Habakkuk said, I'm just going to sit down and wait and see what God's up to. And God came through. Listen, folks, God is coming through. God is in charge. God knows what He's doing. God is a possessor of, He is wisdom personified. You say, well, I just don't understand this and I don't understand that. Trust Him. Trust Him. God knows what He's doing. And here in the book of Esther, it seemed as if righteousness was dethroned, unrighteousness is enthroned, and it seems as if all of the Jewish nation is going to be slain. But we come to chapter 7 and we see the puzzle now coming together from God's point of view. 3 people are present in chapter 7 at the beginning of this chapter. There's wicked Haman, there's the king, and there's Queen Esther. I want you to notice, please, this is the second banquet now that they've been called to. And the king, again, in verse number 2, asked Esther about her request. The king said again unto Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is thy petition, Queen Esther? What is it that you need, even to the half of my kingdom? For the first time, standing in the presence of the king, she reveals what's on her heart. Now remember, the first time around at the first banquet, the king asked the same question, and she said, I can't give you the answer now. If you will wait and meet with me at the next banquet, I will tell you at the next banquet what's on my mind. What's going on? She is following to the best of her ability what she believes to be the leadership. In our era, we'd say the leadership of the Holy Spirit. She believes there is a time. She believes there is a place where this thing needs to be expressed. And she's waited on God. Now the second banquet has come, and now she believes it is time to inform the king. Verse number 3, Esther the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. Verse number 4, the plot is now revealed. The king is unaware of it. Notice what happens. For we are sold, and I and my people to be destroyed. How were they sold? You remember, wicked Haman came into the presence of the king and gave him X amount of dollars to get the decree signed that the Jews were to be killed. I want you to notice in verse number 4 the descriptive terms that are used to describe what is about to happen to the Jewish people on an established date. Verse number 4, we're sold. Secondly, I and my people, watch this, to be destroyed. Now don't pass verse 4 by lightly. For the first time, Queen Esther, who has been in the king's presence on numerous occasions, for the first time she is now revealing that she and the people that are to be destroyed are Jews. She now identifies herself, verse number 4, we are sold. The people that are about to be destroyed are my people. I and my people to be destroyed. Notice the next phrase. We're to be slain. Notice the next phrase. And to perish. Now notice what she's saying here in verse 4. She said, if we were being sold into slavery, king, I would not come into your presence and bother you. We would accept that as a part of our lifestyle. If it was the decree of the king that we would become slaves in your kingdom, then so be it. But she said, it is not us becoming slaves in your kingdom. Quite the opposite. She said, what is about to happen is, Mr. King, I'm about to be killed because of the decree you signed, and all of my people in this kingdom are about to be killed with me. Notice what she's saying. Now, it's very obvious that the king didn't know that. When people ran into the presence of the king and asked him for something, he just signed it, he carte blanched it, he sent it on out, because, again, life didn't mean anything to him. It didn't bother him to kill people by the hundreds. It didn't bother him that if people by the thousands were slain, especially if they were his enemy. Life to him was cheap. So when Haman came into his presence and demanded and put money in his hand that a group of insurgents in his kingdom be killed, he just handed him his signet ring and said, go ahead, establish the date and take care of it. The king had no idea that he was signing, allowing the death warrant of his wife, the queen, to be destroyed. Notice what's happening, please, in verse number 5. And King Ahasuerus answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he? And where is he? I think if I'd have been standing there, I would have said, dummy, you're the king and you don't know about all of these hundreds of thousands of people that are to be killed, and you're asking the question, why don't you know this? You're the one in charge. You're the one that, in essence, has signed the death warrant for thousands of people in this kingdom. As a result of what Queen Esther says, two men are greatly disturbed. The first person that's greatly disturbed is the king, is Haman, verse number 6. The king says, who is he, verse 5, and where is he that durst presume in his heart to do so? And Esther pointed him out in verse number 6. The adversary and the enemy is the wicked Haman. Notice she spared not words. Haman is in their presence. And Esther says, the wicked Haman, the one that's been exalted in a cabinet position here in your kingdom. And Haman was afraid before the king and the king. Now, it don't look very good for him at this point. He recognizes for the first time that he's passed the death sentence on the queen, because he didn't know she was a Jew. And all of a sudden, it dawns on him, this decree that I have signed to kill all of these Jews now includes the king's wife. I would say that he probably stood there and felt like an idiot. He's highly disturbed. For the first time, it dawns on him that he has signed the death decree for the queen in the kingdom. Now, isn't it amazing that Haman's had about 24 terrible hours? You remember when he came into the king's presence and the king said, what should I do to honor a person in my kingdom? And Haman put it on smooth. You remember what he said? He said, you ought to put your attire on somebody, put your crown on their head, and put them on your horse and walk them through the street and say, here's the one that the king doth honor. And you remember the king said, I want you to do that. Go get Mordecai. Mordecai, and do that. And here's old Haman, who hates Mordecai, leading the horse through the city with Mordecai on his hand, and he's saying to everybody, here's the one the Lord doth honor. The king doth honor. But there's something very interesting here, and I've never seen this till just recently. Look at verse 12 of the previous chapter. Chapter number 6, verse number 12. Mordecai came again to the king's gate after they'd rode him through the city, and Haman had said, here's the one that the king delighteth to honor. And Haman hastened to his house mourning and having his head covered. As Haman led the horse through the city, he had his head covered up. He didn't want people to know who he was, as he's honoring the man that God is getting ready to honor. He's had to cover his head up as he brings Haman through the city. He's embarrassed. He set it up to get honored himself, and now he's having to honor the very person that he hates and he detests. Now, less than 24 hours later, he's in the presence of the queen and the king, and suddenly it dawns on him that he's been responsible for signing the decree that's going to kill the queen. Bad day. But also in verse number 7, now the king's having a bad day. In verse number 7, the king got up off of his throne or out of his chair, wherever he's at, and he leaves the room. Now you can read into probably what's going on in his mind and what he's thinking about. He's probably saying to himself, how in the world could this have happened? How could I be responsible for signing a decree, being responsible for a decree that's going to kill the queen? I'm sure that's going through his mind. How could something he's probably saying like this happen in my own kingdom? So the king goes out in the garden, and he's meditating, and he's thinking about it. In verse number 7, while the king has left the room and gone out in the garden, all of a sudden, Haman's standing here, and it's dawned on him, I've signed the decree to kill the queen. I'm in deep water. So Haman starts, in so many words, begging the queen for mercy. He goes over to Queen Esther, and he starts trying to powwow with her because he recognizes that things are not looking well for him. So, verse number 8, the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereof Esther was. This guy needs a brain transplant. Now, I want you to notice that, of course, when it talks about bed, it's talking about they reclined on couches. That was the custom of that day. And now it's been revealed that Esther has the death sentence on her, and her people have the death sentence on them. The king's so upset, he's saying, how in the world did I allow this to happen? He goes out in the garden, and here's old wicked Haman. He's going over to Queen Esther now. He knows that his only hope of survival is to get her to change her mind about him. So he makes his way over where she's reclining on this sofa. And he gets up on the sofa beside of her. Dumb. Dumb. In fact, the first two parts of his name should be Dumb, Dumb Haman. And about the time he gets up on this reclining sofa, the king walks in. Now, can you picture that? The king already feels like a dunce. He's exalted Haman in his kingdom, and now he finds out that Haman's about to kill his queen. And Haman's going to be responsible for killing all of the Jews, of which Queen Esther is a part. And evidently he went out, life, as I said, life didn't mean anything to him. So he's out there walking around. How could I have allowed this to happen? My queen is going to be killed. I'm responsible for the decree that says she's going to be killed. How could I have done this? How could I have allowed this to happen? I can't believe this. I can't believe this is happening in my kingdom. And he turns, does an about face, and goes back in his palace. And when he walks in the door, here is the idiot Haman laying on the sofa beside of the queen. Now notice what's happening here. In chapter 5, verse number 9, if you remember the story, wicked Haman was mad because a Jew, Mordecai, wouldn't bow before him. Now, get the thought. Haman was mad because Mordecai wouldn't bow before him. Mordecai, a Jew, wouldn't bow down before him. And now wicked Haman is bowing before a Jewish woman. You say, what is that, preacher? You call it the providence of God. God's in charge. God's bringing things around. Verse number 8, the king comes back. He sees Haman beside of the queen. From his perspective, verse number 8, it looks like that he's trying to force himself upon the queen. And when somebody's trying to molest the queen, you can forget about anything else that's happened or any other possibilities in the kingdom. That's the death sentence automatically. So he's going to shortly lose his breath. Execution is in place. Verse number 8, the Bible says that the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman was fallen upon the bed whereof Esther was. Then said the king, will he force the queen also before me in the house? Notice that the king did not even have to give a command. As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. If you remember back in 6:12, I showed it to you a while ago, he covered his face in humiliation because he had to exalt Mordecai through the streets of the city. Now his head is covered for execution. What do you call it? Call it the providence of God. Evidently, wicked Haman had told the king's cabinet about the gallows that he was building to hang Mordecai on. Verse number 9, the Bible says that the chamberlains, one of them, said, behold also the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman had made for Mordecai, who had spoken good for the king, standeth in the house of Haman. And the king said, then take Haman and hang him on the gallows that was meant for Mordecai. What is that, preacher? The providence of God. It didn't seem like this was going to be the ending. Haman is laughing. Haman is going home and bragging to his wife and children, if you remember. He's bragging about his wealth. He's going home and bragging about the fact that of all of the 127 providences in the kingdom, that he's the only person invited to the banquet where the king and queen are together. He went home and bragged about his children. He went home and bragged about his exalted position. He comes back and he thinks that he's the one that's going to be honored by the king. He comes back and he makes himself look like a big shot. As a matter of fact, he came early to the banquet so he could talk to the king about the assassination or about the hanging of Mordecai. And it seemed up to a point that heaven was silent, and it seemed like unrighteousness was going to be exalted and righteousness was going to be dethroned. But we call that the transcendence of God's grace, God's mercy, God's knowledge. He transcends our thoughts. He transcends the way we do things. God's still in charge. And the man that built the gallows upon which the godly man was to be hung is himself hung. Didn't take God by surprise. When all of this was happening, God knew exactly what was happening. God knew exactly the end results. And Haman built that gallows right outside of his house. So there's no doubt that when they took Haman and covered his head and took him down to his house and put him on that gallows, there is no doubt that his wife and his children probably stood by and watched the husband and the father being hanged in their presence. Providence of God is on the scene. Now, what are the lessons that we can learn from that? First of all, the lesson that we can learn from this story is that there is a sowing for lost humanity. Now, I hope you heard what I said. There is a sowing and a reaping for lost humanity. Haman sowed anger before Mordecai. He was mad because he wouldn't bow down before him. But in turn, Haman reaped anger from the king. He reaped what he sowed. Haman wanted to kill Mordecai and the Jews. But the end result was the king killed Haman. There is a sowing, and there is a reaping. Be not deceived, God is not mocked. For whatsoever man soweth, that shall he also reap. There's a lot of people in this country and in this world that seem to be getting by with the garbage that's taking place. And it seems like heaven is silent. They're spitting today in the face of my Savior. They did it at Calvary. And His long suffering and His mercy was on demonstration at Calvary, because when they placed the crown on His head, and when they beat Him with rods, and when they nailed Him to the cross, and when they put the spear in His side, and when they spit upon Him and plucked His beard out, and they did all that it was humanly possible for them to do against the Son of God, He looked out across them, and He could have annihilated the human race and spoke this world out of existence if He had chosen to do so, because He's the one that spoke it into place. But when all of that was happening against Him, He looked out across them and said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they did. That's not the normal response, but it was God's response. And the Bible says in the book of Hebrews that He looked beyond the cross to the joy that was set before Him. God in His providence had a plan. And the plan was that He was ultimately to bring those of us who were as much responsible for His crucifixion as the people that stood at the foot of the cross eventually into His presence by cleansing us by His own blood, which He was to shed on Calvary's cross. And to make us, thank God, to make us a part of His family. That was God's ultimate plan for us. Had you stood there that day, you would have said He was crucified in weakness. But the truth is, He was raised in power, because He had a plan for you and me. And He had a plan for this world. And He had a plan for the human race. And the results of that plan is that someday He's going to bring us into His presence. That's the providence of God, the long suffering of God, the knowledge of God, the wisdom of God, the power of God to eventually exalt us into His presence. We don't understand it, but it's God's plan. And thank God it's a good plan. There's a sowing for the lost people. This has been a jihad down in Iran who wants to annihilate the Jew. I predict he will try it. I don't know when, but he's crazy. He's an idiot. And he would like to destroy every Jew on the face of this earth. But in the providence of God, He will not have to call a special council session in heaven to figure out what to do with it. God already knows the end results. I don't know, but God knows. There's a movement here in our country. A movement here in our country to purge Christianity from the saint. That's what the Apostle Paul tried to do. Before he became Paul, Saul, if you read Acts 9, if you read Acts 21 and 22, the Bible said that he tried to persecute that way. That's the phrase that's used. That way. What way? The way of Christ, the way of Christians. He thought he was going to wipe them off the face of the earth. He sat at the feet of Gamaliel. He sat at the feet of the most learned people of his day. He became one of the most learned people of his day. He was Mr. Religion. He was Mr. Answer. He had the answer for all of the questions. And he looked at Jesus Christ as being a false prophet and a false Christ. He could not see any divinity in Him until he met Him on the road to Damascus. And then he started preaching about the faith he once destroyed. The providence of God can turn things around. That's what I'm trying to get us to say tonight. Whatever's going on in your life, the providence of God can take care of it. All of the wealth of Haman was of no avail to rescue him from the hour of death that he was facing. He bragged about it previously. Would you turn in your Bibles for just a moment over to the book of Psalm chapter 49? The book of Psalm chapter 49. And notice verse number 16. Psalm 49, verse number 16. Be not thou afraid when one is made rich, and the glory of his house is increased. And he's talking about from the physical, not from the spiritual. Verse 17, for when he dieth, he shall carry nothing away. His glory shall not descend after him. That's what God says. Here's a man, Haman, who previously went home and he bragged about the things that he possessed. And now all that he possesses cannot add 1 second to his life. He has lived his life in vain. Jesus said about Judas that it would have been better for him if he'd never been born. Here's a man that has wealth. Here's a man that has position. Here's a man that has prestige. But it's all gone now. It's all gone. It can't help him in the hour of death. It can't add 1 minute to his life. It can't cushion him whatsoever, because in the day of one's death, what we possess is of no value to us. And wicked Haman has carved out his own route to destruction. And all of his possessions will not be able to help him one iota. Somebody says about Gates and all of these wealthy people of the world. Somebody, man, I'd like to have that. Yeah, it would make life easier in some respects, but it also brings with it a lot of bondage. A lot of bondage. As a matter of fact, one of the Old Testament writers said this: Lord, don't make me rich so I forget you. And don't make me so poor that I have to steal. Just keep me in the middle of the road. That's probably where most of us need to be. It's right there in the middle of the road. Believing God, trusting God, living for God. I've noticed a lot of people, they get to things in this world and they forget about where it came from. Here's a man that had it all. He's got a cabinet position in the kingdom. Here's a man that's got money to even try to buy the king with, to kill the Jews. Here's a man that people bow down before as he walks in and as he walks out. It's not helping him now because he's messed his life up and he's going to be hanged on his own gallows. I learned something else in closing tonight. This is very interesting. History bears out the fact that everybody that's ever tried to destroy the Jew has ended up destroyed. Genesis chapter 12, I will bless them that bless you. I will curse him that curseth you. It all dates back down at the beginning of Pharaoh in Egypt. Pharaoh tried to destroy the Jew. Many of them were destroyed. They became servants. They became hard taskmasters. Many of them died under the lash of the Pharaoh. God said, I'm going to deliver you. God sent Moses down there. The plan was put in place. The Passover took place. They left the country. The Pharaoh that tried to destroy the Jews ended up himself destroyed in the Red Sea. Bad move when you try to annihilate God's people. You move on through the Bible and you recognize there's a man by the name of Nebuchadnezzar. Same thing down in Babylon. But God put him out to pasture. He grew nails like an eagle, ate grass like an ox, until he came to his senses and recognized there is a God in heaven. You move into our text here in the book of Esther, and here is Haman in Persia. Haman signs the decree that all of the Jews of the kingdom are going to be killed. He's messing with God's people. He's messing with the apple of God's eye. And the one that tried to annihilate the Jews himself was hung on the very gallows that he provided for the death of Mordecai. We come down a few years ago. There was a man named Hitler, a godless man, who himself in Germany tried to destroy the Jewish race. He wanted to produce a super race of people. And he did not believe the Jews qualified, so he put them on trains and he sent them into those concentration camps, gas chambers, marched them down steps into a basement area, poured cyanide down a chimney and gassed them and then put them in the furnaces and burned them by the millions of people. But Hitler ended up with a slug in his own head because he took his own life, because he recognized he was fighting against God, and nobody ever fights against God and wins. By the way, Pharaoh's gone. Nebuchadnezzar's gone. Haman's gone. Hitler's gone. And the Jews have got their own state. God protects His people. The providence of God. It seemed a catastrophe. It seemed that on a certain day, thousands of Jews would be killed. The decree has gone out. God says, I transcend all of man's actions. I will see to it, God says, that my people live through this ordeal. And He did. Right now, that little country called Iran, don't you kid yourself a minute, that little country called Iran, who says they're trying to get nuclear energy so they can have nuclear power, they are lying through their teeth. It's just a matter of time. They're going to have the weapon that they could put on the top of a rocket and export it over into the land of Israel. Ahmadinejad believes that their Messiah is coming back, and that he is the man of the hour that's been appointed by Allah. Did you hear what I said? He believes he is the prophet of the hour that has been appointed by Allah to expunge the Jews from off of the face of the earth so that he can prepare this world for the coming of his Messiah. And he believes he is the self-appointed person to destroy the Jewish race. Let me tell you something. There's no perspiration running off the face of God. Let me tell you something tonight. In the providence of God, He already sees it consummated. Whatever it is, God already knows about it. Because He transcends time. He sees us in Romans chapter 8 as already in His presence. If you read, whom He called, He justified. Them He justified. He sanctified. Them He sanctified. He glorified. If you read that closely, it's all in past tense as far as God's concerned. It's already happened. As far as God's concerned, we're already there. Ephesians says we're already seated with Him right now in heavenly places. And God already sees us there. And God sees the Jew getting ready in their land to be anointed to preach the kingdom message to the tune of 144,000, 12,000 from each tribe. Nobody is going to thwart the plan of God. He's in charge. You say, what does all that mean? It means you better be prayed up. You need to be looking up. Because when the forces of the world are zooming their arsenal towards God's people, there's going to be a divine intervention. Because God's not going to let that happen. And the only way that will not happen, first of all, is for the church to get out of here. God's coming. Jesus is coming for His church. He might come tonight. Some of you may not have to go to work tomorrow. You say, well, I hate that. Yeah. Just any day now, the songwriter said, Jesus is coming. And you know, my prayer is, as John on the Isle of Patmos, even so come, Lord Jesus. Come on and get us. Man, I'm ready. I'm looking forward to the day when we get out and Jesus comes back down here and takes over. They're not going to vote Him in. He's already in. There won't be any election. He's done elected. He's in office to stay. He's going to come back down here and take over. The Bible says He's going to, Zechariah 13:14, He's going to set His feet on the Mount of Olives, and the mount's going to split. And He's going to come down, fight the battle of Armageddon. He's going to establish His kingdom. Be no more death in this land. Be no more old folks' homes. Be no more aches and pain. It's all going to be a history. right here on this earth, where He started it out right in the Garden of Eden, and the devil came in, tempted Eve, and she ate us out of house and home. But when He comes back, He's going to straighten it all out. Let me tell you something. It's a living hope. It's not a dream to be awakened from. It's not some kind of a fantasy that somebody made up. It's a biblical reality that Jesus Christ is coming back, and He could come at any minute. This world is primed for the coming of Jesus. One of these days, I'm going to look over at some of you on the way up, and I'm going to say, I told you. And you're going to say, preacher, you was right. And some of you sitting here tonight says, move me if you can. You're going to be, well, hallelujah. It sure is good to be saved. Sure is good to be in the rapture. Sure is good to be in the presence of the Lord. I didn't know it could be this good. You're going to find it out when the Lord comes. He's going to rapture us into His presence. The Middle East says He's doing it. The seasons, the signs of the time says He's going to do it. But the Bible, like a red light flashing off and on, is saying it's going to happen. It's going to happen. Hamans are not going to continue on. God's in control. His providence is in control. Be not weary in well-doing, for in due season you shall reap, if you faint not. Don't quit. Dr. Howes used to say there's two words you ought to cut out of your dictionary. He said you ought to go home, get your scissors, and cut them out. The word quit and the word can't. He said you ought to cut them out. Just cut them out of the dictionary. Why? Because I can do all things through Christ Jesus, which loveth me. What a providence story of God, reversing the story of the book of Esther, that the Jews might be spared to later give us a Savior, and to give us a Bible, and to give us a group of people that God's still going to use in the future, of Jewish people. What a God we have. Wait a minute. He preserves the Jew, but He also preserves those of us that are saved. We're sealed by the Holy Spirit unto the day of redemption. Quit holding on, turn loose, let Him take care of you. Trust Him. He's in charge. His providence is going to take care of it all. Aren't you glad of that? Let's stand with our heads bowed, our eyes closed. Just a moment, we're going to sing a stanza of invitation. If you've been doubting tonight, why don't you turn loose and start trusting? If the Spirit of God's speaking to you tonight about anything in your life, why don't you come to this altar and get it settled? If you've kind of doubted the Lord about some things in your life, why don't you come down here tonight and say, Lord, I'm sorry I doubted you. I know you're in charge. You're in control. I should have trusted you more fully, more completely. Whatever is going on in your life tonight, got you disturbed, got you perplexed, why don't you trust the providence of God? Why don't you come down here tonight and say, Lord, I yield to you, whatever you want, whatever your desire is for my life, however you want to use me. Lord, I surrender it all to you tonight. He'll use you. One reason He wouldn't use any of us is if we're not yielded to Him. If you need to come, we're going to sing this stanza. Would you make your way down?